Max Verstappen saw another Formula One record fall his way with his 14th victory of the 2022 season here in Mexico City today, but it was one of his most underrated skills that allowed him to defeat Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes. From Mexico City, welcome to Paddock Backdown. So it was another win for Max Verstappen today, a familiar story we've got very used to through this season, and what a win it was. He really eked those tyres out so well at the end to pull off a one-stop strategy and defeat Lewis Hamilton. After the first stint of the race, it really did look like at one point that Hamilton might have a shot at victory. Mercedes started second and third on the grid, and we know just how powerful that slipstream can be going down to the first corner. Verstappen held on to the lead really well, and from there it was all about managing his tyres and trying to combat Hamilton. Hamilton managed to stay within 2 seconds throughout the entirety of the first stint, which really went a long way to putting him in that fight for the victory. I think a lot of people were watching thinking that it would be a slow burner of a race. Not very exciting to begin with, not many overtakes. I think anyone's going to be calling that the greatest race in F1 history, but it looked like the strategies might just come together. The difference in the starting tyre between what Mercedes and Red Bull did meant that it looked like Verstappen was always going to two-stop the race, whereas Mercedes, favouring the hards for the second stint, could one-stop. That set up a possibility of Verstappen having to pit again, go for the soft tyre and then overtake George Russell, Sergio Perez and then Hamilton if he wanted to win the race. But in the end, Verstappen was able to go 45 laps on the medium compound tyre, a stint length that Pirelli didn't expect was possible ahead of the race, always thinking it would always be a two-stop. So it surprised a lot of people that he managed to pull it off and get the win as he did. So why was it that Red Bull and Mercedes went for different strategies today in Mexico? We spoke to Christian Horner and Toto Wolff after the race, and they explained how in the pre-race meetings both teams came to their respective strategies today. Red Bull always thought that going soft-medium was going to work, but they admitted it would be a little bit risky. Christian Horner explained how they wanted to go with the mantra of Dietrich Mateschitz, the Red Bull founder who passed away last week very sadly at the age of 78, and how he was always about being bold, being ambitious. They knew it might be a little bit difficult to make the tyres last as long as they did, but they thought the one-stop would be the best way to get home. Mercedes, on the other hand, thought that the hard tyre was always going to be the way to go. Their numbers suggested that going soft-medium or medium-soft wasn't actually going to work out. So that's why we ended up with the split in starting tyres. Verstappen and Perez on the softs, Hamilton and Russell starting on the mediums. It meant the Red Bulls would have a better getaway from the grid thanks to the extra grip afforded by the soft tyre. We saw that with Max Verstappen. It's the first time in the history of this race, I believe, that the pole sitter has actually managed to keep hold of first position on the run down to the first corner and through the opening complex. But the Mercedes cars would come back into contention later on in the stint. But it was quite clear when the drivers made the swap to their second set of tyres what the right call was. Hamilton was quickly on the radio saying that his hards weren't performing as well as the mediums were and he wasn't liking them, whereas Verstappen was able to just keep building the gap, even though he came in for the mediums earlier than Hamilton had for his set of hard tyres. But it still looked like the Max would have to come in another time and take another set of softs. This is where his underrated skill came into play and helped him win the race in such controlled fashion. Now we all know just how good Max Verstappen is. We talk a lot about his aggression, his brilliant overtakes, his fights through the field. We saw that I think at Spa earlier this year. I think back to Mexico last year when he swooped around the outside of both Mercedes cars into turn 1 to seize the lead of the race. But tyre management, that's not really something you think of when you think of Max Verstappen. If anyone's going to be considered the tyre whisperer at Red Bull, you would normally think of Sergio Perez. But more and more, I think we have to start talking about the man across the garage, Verstappen, as being the real tyre king at Red Bull. We've seen it a number of times this season. Even in Austin, he was able to manage his tyres really well as he fought back from that slow pit stop, knowing when to push, not to overuse them too early and burn them up basically. And I think at Spa as well, he was one of the few drivers to start the race on the soft compound tyre, and yet he made them last a lot longer than a lot of the drivers who went for the mediums. That helps his charge from 14th on the grid to win the race. We saw it in play once again today. Verstappen was able to stretch out that medium stint all the way to the checkered flag. Horner said that there was not really a consideration of bringing Max in for a set of softs, knowing they would give up the track position. It was always going to be something that might have happened had there been a safety car or a virtual safety car, but when the VSC did come out for Fernando Alonso's stoppage late in the race, it was too late. Verstappen already had enough for lead that meant there was no point bringing him in again. Verstappen was also very wise about knowing what tyres to use. He said that after FP1 he saw the hard tyre wasn't working very well on his car, so knew he wanted to avoid it for the race. That meant softs and mediums were always going to be the way to go. We got a clue from GP, his race engineer, during the race that his tyres were looking pretty good when he told him that the soft tyre that came off his car after that first stint actually hadn't been worn as much as they thought it had been, even though Max said that his tyres felt dead at one point. It all meant that Verstappen could get to the checkered flag on just one pit stop, making those mediums last so well and extending that lead over Hamilton on his way to such controlled victory, a record-breaking 14th win of the year. I put it to Christian Horner after the race and said, do you think the tyre management is an underrated skill of Max Verstappen? And he agreed. He said yes. He said he's been masterful with it. And he said that if you actually looked at what Max did in the cockpit, using all of the tools on the car and changing settings and dials and things like that in order to look after tyres as well as he can, as well as the back and forth he has with his race engineer GP, you'll actually get a real insight and understanding of just how Max has become such a tyre master. So when we look back on this season for Max Verstappen, it's not only his overtakes and the way that he's controlled races so well, running away from the rest of the field, that should come to mind. Also think about tyre management. I think it's something that he's really shown he can do so well this year, and it's another part of his armoury that's made this such a strong season. With 14 wins to his name though, where does this rank among the most dominant seasons in Formula 1 history? It's a big claim, I know. You think back to Sebastian Vettel, his win of 9 wins in a row to close out 2013. Michael Schumacher in his heyday, of course. Those were the two drivers who had scored 13 wins in a season before and that Verstappen surpassed today. But where does Max rank among those dominant seasons? Again, something I put to Christian Horner, and he said that he does think this is probably the most dominant season he's seen from a driver in Formula 1. He said it's not only the wins that Verstappen's had, but the fashion that it's been done in. It's not always been from pole position. Charles Leclerc has 9 pole positions, more than Max Verstappen, and was such a close rival to Verstappen in the early part of this season. Horner also pointed out that Verstappen's won 2 sprint races as well, taking his actual tally this year to 16 races, if you consider the sprints alongside his Grand Prix tally. The challenge for Verstappen now will be trying to add to his haul in the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time before heading to the season finale in Abu Dhabi. He may already have won the championship, but Verstappen can certainly write more F1 history before the 2022 season is over.